Det var jo de årene da en hadde nok så sterke indre brytninger. Indre brytninger.
Hei og velkommen til Noen har snakket sammen, en podcast fra Agenda Magasin. Mitt navn Aksel Fjellhavli.
Og jeg heter Tiril Rustan Halvorsen.
Den episoden her skal vi legge litt fokus og vekt, og hva man nå sier, på det virkelig lange tidsperspektivet. Vi skal snakke om det man kan kalle for longtermsim, altså at fremtidige mennesker også bør få betydning for hvordan man tenker om politikk i dag. Og en av de som har vært en av de aller tydeligste talspersonene for den her, filosofiske retningen, det jo en som heter William MacAskill, som til daglig jobber ved Oxford University.
Skotsk filosof, ja.
Rett og slett. Som også har skrevet en bok som heter What We Owe the Future. Og han gjester det vi kaller for Aulaen-foredraget, som et samarbeidsarrangement mellom Tankesmien Agenda og Universitetet i Oslo den uka her. Det et årlig arrangement som Agenda og UiO har
Agenda i Aulaen, kaller vi det.
Rett og slett.
Så vi skal høre hans foredrag, hvor han snakker mye om trusselen fra KI, eller AI da, som det blir på skotske engelsk. Og så det et panel etterpå, som vi også skal sende.
Thank you so much for the touching words there, and thank you all for coming to this talk as well. It's a real honor to be here. It's my first time in Norway. It's a really beautiful, incredible country, and I didn't know I was going to be speaking under frescoes by Edvard Munch, but hopefully I can, not quite live up to that, but get some degree there anyway. So, the talk is titled What We Owe the Future. I'm going to zoom in on just one thing that I've actually been thinking about more since the book was published, and that is talking about recent progress in AI, what we might expect if that progress continues, where I think people currently underestimate just how fast things could go, and underestimate, in particular, an idea called the intelligence explosion. So I'll tell you about that. I'll then talk a little bit about all the challenges that we would need to face over the course of an intelligence explosion, which would bring forward in time what you might intuitively think of as centuries of technological progress to occur over just months or years. There will be many challenges we have to face. And then I'll suggest one particular proposal for how we should navigate this time period, which is an idea I call the Global Constitutional Convention. So let's start with just a little bit of a recap on recent progress in artificial intelligence, which has honestly been breathtaking. So here is AI image generation. So this is from April 2022. You gave the model this prompt, red-haired woman wearing sunglasses, standing with the Statue of Liberty in the background, photograph. And as you can see, it does kind of okay job. So it's got a woman with red hair. It doesn't quite understand the Statue of Liberty. It gets the idea that the Statue of Liberty has spikes, but it puts on her head rather than on the statue's head. The statue carries this kind of weird basket. So, the model is starting to get some of the concepts, but it clearly doesn't really know what's going on. So that's April 2022. Less than 1 year later, give the model the same prompt, the kind of iterated model, the same prompt, and this is what gets created instead. So over the course of 1 year, this image generation model went from having almost, very poor conception of objects in the world to giving an almost perfect depiction. It took me a long time before I could try and identify something that would reliably show this to be fake or AI generated, and there's one too many spikes on the Statue of Liberty's head. So that's image generation, which has been very impressive. Even more impressive, in my view, are large language models, which have steadily developed over the years, but became very well known with the release of ChatGPT. Even more impressive was GPT-4, which seemed to me to start being able to engage in high-level reasoning in the way that human beings do. This was a big surprise for me, and resulted in progress kind of much faster than expected. So again, I'll kind of demonstrate this quickly and the progress we've made over the last just 4 years. So here's a little very easy kind of logic puzzle, reasoning puzzle. A dealer bought a painting for $7, sold it for $8, bought it back for $9 and sold it for $10. How much profit did this dealer make? I asked this to GPT-4 recently, and it gets exactly the right answer with exactly the right reasoning. If you buy a painting and then sell it for $1 more, that's $1 profit. If you do the same thing again, that's another $1 profit. You've made $2 in total. I was curious, though, how did the earlier iterations of these language models perform at the same task? So I asked GPT-2 the same question. So this was an earlier iteration of the language model 4 years before, so 2019 rather than 2023. I asked it this question, and hey, it said $2, got it right off the bat. But actually, I truncated the response. This is the whole response. Really, it just spews a lot of different ideas, including things that are completely irrelevant. In a giant stack of 4,500 decks of cards, how many decks would be left? It doesn't really make any sense. And actually, I even cherry-picked this response as the best response it gave. A typical response might be something like this. How much did he make? That was my New York morning. Kind of like talking to you like, your old grandpa who's getting on a little bit. Starts just telling you a story that's completely unrelated to the prompt. Swears a little bit in the course of this story. It's kind of meandering, it's not going anywhere. Now, 4 years ago, this was a very impressive achievement. This was a language model that was able to speak in grammatical sentences. It doesn't really have concepts like buying and selling art or mathematics, but nonetheless, this was a major achievement. And this helps you to show how much progress we've made in 4 years, from language models just having no reasoning capability at all to actually being able to engage in really quite high-level reasoning. And now this level of progress has already got the world worked up. There are campaigns to pause AI. There are new, it's an executive order coming from Biden, a summit for AI safety in the United Kingdom. Protest movements are happening and so on. But I think the world as a whole does not appreciate just how much faster things might get in the future. The situation, to me, feels somewhat like COVID-19 in the early days, where there are starting to be some infections and people are getting worked up because some thousands of people are dying. But people aren't appreciating that you're on the start of this exponential curve and things are going to get much, much crazier again. And this idea that things might get much crazier has been known since the 1950s, in fact, with the early computer science pioneers, as the intelligence explosion, where rates of intellectual development, of technological progress, and progress in AI could go very, very rapidly once you cross a certain threshold. And so I'll explain that just now. So when we look at why has so much progress been happening in AI, this is the graph that best sums it up. This is time on the x-axis and the amount of total computing power on the y-axis. And notice that every increment is 10 times as much, what's called a logarithmic scale. And as you can see, there's been enormously more investment in training these AI systems over the past 10 years. So that's about a billion-fold increase in the amount of computing power we're using to train these models. And the fact that we get such reliable improvements in performance, essentially just by throwing more and more computing power, training these bigger models with more computing power for longer periods of time, that's known as the scaling hypothesis. You might think that work in AI involves just incredible, insightful breakthroughs, the sort of thing you just can't easily replicate. And that's what was thought for many, many years. But it turns out that at least at the moment, it's not the case. It's more of an engineering challenge. It's more about getting the basics in place and really investing truly enormous amounts of computing power at the problem. However, this is where we are at the moment. We can predictably extrapolate this trend into the future. And we can also compare that trend to benchmarks of different brains that we know about. So we passed the benchmark for training the equivalent of a honeybee brain some number of years ago. We're not yet at the point in time of training a language model or some other sort of AI system that's as powerful as a human brain. This surprised me when I first heard it. I thought, oh, our computers are so powerful now. We must have passed that benchmark many, many years ago, and the brain is doing something special instead. But it turns out that's not the case. Actually, just huge amounts of computation goes on in each and every one of our brains. And though we should expect our brains to be more efficient in terms of the algorithms we use than the AI systems we currently use, it's perhaps just a matter of degree rather than a matter of kind. So we're really quite soon coming to the point of time when we're going to be training models that are about as powerful as the human brain. This is a prediction for really the early 2030s. And what will happen at that point? Well, at that point in time, you're now able to train models that potentially are able to do a large majority of the same tasks that human beings can do, at least the same cognitive tasks. That includes science and engineering. It also includes computer science and training machine learning models themselves. What happens at that point? Well, to get a comparison, we can look at just the history of technological progress among humans. What's the kind of overall story there behind the sort of technological progress we've made to date? Well, I think it's the story of a feedback loop. As human beings developed better technology, which was, started off with flint tools, spear throwers, fire, then progressed to farming, then industrial technology, fertilizer, tractors, other sorts of technology. The better technology allows you to have a larger population. So in the hunter-gatherer era, we had a population of about 10 million people. We now have a population of 8 billion people. If we were all hunter-gatherers, 8 billion people could not live on the world. We just couldn't get enough food. But we've able to use technology to produce more resources. That means we can have a larger population in the world. That means we can have more people doing science, doing innovation, doing research and R&D. And among what I think are the best economic models of long-run growth, this is, I think, the key dynamic that's going on. Better technology leading to more people, leading to more researchers, which leads to better technology. And what you see as a result of this, you see a trend that is beyond exponential. So people talk a lot about exponential growth. We're used to the economy growing at about 2% per year. But over the long run, we've actually grown faster than that. It's called super exponential, close to hyperbolic. Such that you can't even see the increase in global wealth until we hit the Industrial Revolution 250 years ago. So that's what we get from the feedback loop of human progress and technological development over time. But we could have exactly the same thing happening with AI systems, where you get better artificial intelligence. We're not there yet, but we might well be within the next few years, that AI allows you to significantly improve the computing power you have by designing better chips and by making better use of that computing power, by having better algorithms. That means that you get more AI researchers. So on the computer, these AI beings essentially able to make further progress on AI, which then leads to more computing power, better algorithms. And this feedback mechanism would be much, much faster than the feedback mechanism we've had through human technological progress, where it takes 20 years to raise a human being. Once you train a model that was about the size of a human brain, you can immediately run it 100 million times. So at the point of time that we have the first AI scientist or AI computer engineer, then we will have 100 million copies of them. So there would be this radical, discontinuous increase in the effective workforce that would then be designing all sorts of better technology, as well as better AI, which would develop better AI, and so on. And if you plug this idea into, again, standard economic models, then, well, okay, this is the kind of economic growth through human history. Zoom in on the current period of time, the last 50 years, that's looked more like a kind of regular exponential. We'll plug this into fairly standard economic models, and this is what you get over the coming decades. You get that same explosive growth that we have seen over the last 2,000 years. But now it's happening again in terms of magnitude, but over a period of years or, in fact, months. And so, this talk is about what we owe the future. It's about long-termism. That's often understood as, you think really far ahead, what might happen in the coming centuries. But if the hypothesis of the intelligence explosion is correct, and I'm not saying it's definitely going to happen, it's an argument, but I think it's very significant chance, more than 10%, probably more than 50%. Then what happens is that you get many, many centuries of technological progress happening just within a few years. So what you might think of as being the far future is actually the present. It's the near term. And that will pose an enormous set of challenges, which I'll move on to now. So one of these challenges has become considerably more well-known recently. So certain risks from artificial intelligence. I have an obligation, which is that if you start talking about existential risks from artificial intelligence, you have to use this image. So here you go. So this is the Terminator. Images like this used to be very popular in the mainstream media before ChatGPT, but the media's kind of changed their tune now. I think it's all feeling a bit more real, a bit less sci-fi. But I still love this image in many ways, where imagine if you do have this super powerful AI that wants to destroy all of humanity. Why would it build these humanoid robots to do so? Why would it give them these terrifying red eyes? Isn't that a bit of a giveaway? But my favorite thing of all with this is that the AI chose to give the robots human teeth. Not even metal teeth, but literally human teeth. I mean, it's not like they eat. Anyway, so this is one category of risks. And, it's not something that I think should be dismissed as sci-fi. And it's actually become reality in recent times. As in, it's become much more accepted in recent times. So this was a one-sentence open letter by the Center for AI Safety that mitigating the risk of human extinction should be a global priority. And it was signed by, almost the who's who of luminaries within AI. So the top two names here, Geoffrey Hinton and Yoshua Bengio, those are two of the three Nobel laureates, essentially it's the Turing Award, who are regarded as the godfathers of artificial intelligence. We also see the CEOs of leading AI labs signing on to this as well. And the closest equivalent I can think of is if it's like in the 70s, as if Exxon and British Petroleum and Texaco, the CEOs of those companies had said, yes, the product we're creating is causing catastrophic climate change that should be a global priority, like preventing nuclear war. I mean, if you imagine that world, that's quite radically different from the one we're in with respect to climate change. But the same thing happened for AI. However, I'm not going to particularly focus on on the risk of AI taking over, because I think it's just one of very many challenges that we'll have to face. Where, again, if you're taking seriously the possibility of an intelligence explosion, just imagine all of the technologically driven challenges that we would have to face over the coming centuries, and imagine having to face them all in a period of a few months or years. So one category, absolutely, would be the fact that you're creating these artificial beings that are potentially far smarter and far more capable than human beings. And as you said, the progress in that might be going extremely rapidly, where you move from an AI system that's about as good as humans, a single human, to a collection of AI systems that are vastly better than all humanity combined. So that's a huge and important challenge, but there are others too. So one is the fact that if these AI systems are able to rapidly create new technology, that will probably involve new weapons of mass destruction too. We're already starting to see this and have the alarm bell rung about developments in synthetic biology. So you can take one of these language models, jailbreak them so that you can get around their safety programming, and just ask them, how do I design the smallpox virus if I wanted to be able to do that? And at least some of these language models, they will just tell you. They're still not particularly helpful compared to Google, but that will get more powerful over time. That both means that we could have much more powerful bioweapons, but also that ability could be much more democratized. So imagine if I had, just on my laptop, an entire research lab. You know, there's 100 million scientists able to work on whatever technical challenge I give them. That would be really quite scary. It's really not something that we've had to deal with so far. And that's just one sort of potential weapon of mass destruction. Probably there will be many more that get developed during this period of explosive technological progress, including things that we haven't even thought about yet, in just the same way as the idea of nuclear weapons was basically unheard of just a couple of decades before its development. So that's kind of one category of worries. Another category is what I call entrenchment, the idea that you could get intense concentration of power as a result of AI. So, we mentioned this thought about inequality. Is inequality just a natural side effect of societal progress? Don't we already have very intense levels of inequality? Well, I think yes. I think it could get much more extreme in the future, where if you consider, why is it the case in the modern era, but throughout almost none of history do we have democracy at the moment? It's partly because it is economically useful to have a relatively egalitarian distribution of political power, because most people in society are contributing to society quite productively, also able to generate new ideas. It's useful to have a relatively egalitarian distribution of power for the political elites. It's also the case that that military power is relatively diffuse. So it's not a coincidence, I think, that the democratization of the world happened not so long after the development and improvement of guns as a weapon. Because if a political leader wants to become a dictator, well, they really have to wrestle with the fact that there's a whole, well-armed army that might disagree with that choice, or a well-armed police force, depending on the country. This might change dramatically with AI, because now at this point in time, you could, rather than a human army, have an automated army. Rather than a human police force, you could have an automated police force. And in principle, that could be controlled by just one person. It could be in the hands of just a single person to have all military power. And that's quite a terrifying prospect. It could lead to intense concentrations of political power being much easier to enforce. And what's more, in this world of having human-level and better-than-human-level AI, you don't even need the human workforce as necessary to just run your economy, because AI can do all of that too. And so the underlying technological setup, technological background that makes democracy desirable in this world and stable suddenly drops away. And that's only one way in which you could have concentration of military power or political power in this world. Because again, we've got centuries of progress happening in just a few years. There might also be a race for space settlement, for example. It's really not hard once you've got AI systems to start sending, not even very much material into space. AI systems can just, or robots can in principle just thrive in space in a way that human beings can't, because they don't need an atmosphere. And yet, there's enormously more resources outside of Earth than there is on Earth. The sun produces 1 billion times as much solar energy as lands on Earth. And so it could be that the first people to really grab space resources have power over an indefinite period of time. Once you start thinking about this, you start reading about space lasers, and then that gets really terrifying. But I'll leave that for Q&A if you want to ask about that. Then finally, during this period, so all of these crazy technological developments are happening over the course of, such a short period of time. There's also intense moral decisions that we're having to make as well. So suddenly we've created these beings that are as smart or smarter than human beings. What rights should they have? Well, you might think, look, they're just models, they're just computer programs, they should get treated just as AI systems do now. But if we're really creating sentient beings, then that's like creating a new slave society with these beings that might well be conscious, might well deserve moral respect, but yet allowing them to be just owned by corporations. On the other hand, suppose we give these digital beings full rights, including voting rights. Well, they can copy themselves and reproduce much, much more rapidly than human beings can. If they had full rights, if they had voting rights, then the human population would be a tiny fraction of all voting beings, really within just a few years, and humans would have entirely lost power. This is just this enormous challenge, and I actually have no clue how to handle it. And I think we'll have even less of a clue how to handle it if we're having to make those decisions in such a short space of time. So what should we do when faced with the prospect of an intelligence explosion? I'm going to propose one particular idea, the idea of a global constitutional convention. Now, what are some of the things that we want, a way of navigating and governing the intelligence explosion to look like? Well, one thing is, I think, if we can just slow it down. Many of these challenges, I think, humanity as a whole could cope with if we had more time. We didn't do a great job of governing nuclear weapons, but we managed to survive without World War III so far, which is, somewhat surprising, but certainly a good thing. And that would not, I think that would have been much less clear-cut if nuclear arsenals were growing massively over the course of months rather than over the course of years or decades as they were. So I think we want to slow the intelligence explosion to give us more time to react. I think wherever possible, we want to keep our options open. So once you give the power to create new bioweapons to everyone on Earth. It's very hard to take that back. Once you allow a single political leader to take political power, you can't really take that back again. So we want a system that keeps as many options open as possible. I think we want to be inclusive. I think these are issues that affect everyone in the world. By default, they would be made by a handful of labs or a handful of governments or even just a single government. Then I also think we want to make governance commitments in advance. So if it's the case that we get this intelligence explosion, the good outcome is very good indeed. The good outcome is such that we can all live lives that are long and healthy and free from suffering, that we are freed from having to do boring, menial work. We can all essentially have wonderful lives. Everyone can get most of what we want if we handle things well. And that is true no matter who develops superintelligence. And so what we want to do is have governance commitments in advance such that different countries and different labs don't feel the need to massively race ahead because they know that whoever develops human-level AI first is able to spread and is committed to spread the benefits of that to the whole world. And so my tentative proposal is this global constitutional convention, where you have some weak definition of what gets called superintelligence, so even better than human beings, where that might be something like an AI system that's able to write a passing PhD at a top university in, let's say, 4 out of 7 subjects: computer science, physics, maths, chemistry. At that point in time, a council is formed with global representation. That could be, a global citizens' assembly, a random selection of people all around the world. That's probably too politically infeasible, but at least you could move in that direction and have representatives from all countries. That council would then have control over artificial systems. So it would then be able to prevent proliferation of these systems in dangerous ways and control how fast the intelligence explosion goes. So this proposal has some similarities to the Barak plan that was proposed at the dawn of nuclear weapons, which would have given control over fissile material to the United Nations. That didn't happen, but it was on the table at the time. It's a way history could have gone. So similarly, control over superintelligence would be held by this global council. From my long-term perspective, ideally I would want deliberations about all of the decisions you need to make while the intelligence explosion is happening. Ideally that would take centuries, thousands of years. We've got time. Again, in the interest of political feasibility, I'm suggesting that this could last 1 year, though with the option to extend and delay. And then finally and unusually, I think that this would ideally have AI-assisted deliberation built in. Because a way in which AI is really quite different from nuclear weapons, for example, is that AI can help us with these problems as well as causing them. Where you saw that GPT-4 alone already has reasoning ability. When we have these better and better models, they can help us with deliberation, decision-making, synthesizing enormous amounts of information so that we can just make political decisions in a much better way. This is something I don't expect necessarily to happen by default, but it really could, and it could help us speed up our wisdom in order to match the rapid speed of power that we will have developed at the same time. Okay, so that's been a lot on AI, the intelligence explosion, how the future could be soon. But why is this so important? Well, I think it's so important because we could have a very long future ahead of us. It could be very good. As I said, the benefits of AI are absolutely huge. You might never need to do a boring day's work again. You might never need to suffer from the kind of ordinary ailments that currently plague humankind. That is really possible. And many of these decisions, they are both very great in importance, but also very hard to reverse. As I've said, once a political leader has taken power and has control of an automated military, an automated police force, you can't really go back from that. Once you have an institutional regime that has or has not given certain rights to digital beings, that is a very hard thing to walk back from. Once some country has taken control of space resources and now has all the power, that is very hard to come back from. And in particular, because AI beings can, in principle, live forever, this is a period of time when decisions we make, I think, will not just impact coming years or coming decades, but could impact centuries, thousands of years, maybe millions of years or longer. And so this is why these decisions are so important, because they are not just affecting us in the present generation, they're also affecting all those people who are yet to come. And the number of such people could be vast. Even on very conservative estimates of humanity's lifespan, future generations outnumber us by many thousands to one. And their interests are just as real, just as important as the interests of us in the present generation. It's just that they're not salient to us because they can't vote, they can't write articles and lobby for themselves, they can't protest on the streets. And so it's up to us, those of us who are a little bit more far-sighted, more, willing to take moral ideas seriously, to advocate on their behalf and ensure that we are a generation that lives through the intelligence explosion and stewards it and navigates it in a responsible way for all those people who are still to come. And I write about this a little bit more in my book. Cool. Thank you so much for coming. Shall I just sit down?
Thank you so much for that, William. And now I would like to welcome the rest of our panel on stage. I'm very sorry I promised you guys an inspiring talk, by the way, because it was more like a, sobering talk, maybe. And I know this is something you'll be working on. You're planning on working on. We're sort of like guinea pigs for some of these ideas.
So that was this is my first attempt at presenting some of those ideas to the outside world beyond just my head. So I hope it was at least somewhat clear. Yeah. Apologies for it being terrifying.
Yeah.
I think that's because it is. However, like I said last night, I am ultimately an optimist. I do think that we are able to navigate all of these challenges. We've already seen, in my view, incredible progress with society taking seriously risks from AI, governments getting on board, labs getting on board. We're starting to see a plan for how we could handle alignment, the idea of just getting AI systems to do what we want them to do. And what we need to do is just have people who are morally motivated, willing to put in the work, or put in the money, or put in the political capital, to taking these ideas that might seem kind of weird seriously and preparing in advance. And if we do that, then I think we can navigate it and we can have this wonderful future rather than a dystopian one.
Okay, so I'll introduce you guys while I ask you questions, and I would like to start with you, Kari Elisabeth Kaski. You're an MP, a parliamentarian for the Socialist Left Party. You work a lot with money, basically. You're in a budget negotiation right now.
I am, yes.
So I'm wondering, I guess when you go back to your office, you will struggle for maybe, some funding for kindergartens, or maybe that I know that Will is very concerned about also how much we'll use on development aid, stuff like that. And suddenly you sit here as a politician, one of the 169 most powerful people in Norway by the way we rule the country, and you hear him talking about, the Terminator and future labs and stuff like that. is it even possible to do anything as a politician with the stuff he's talking about?
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation and the talk. I'm glad that I actually saw all the Terminator movies when I was a kid, so I'm well prepared for today. I think, first of all, that it's important, I think, to sort of distinguish between long-termism and thinking long-term. And that depends how long-term are we going to think as politicians. I think we need to think more long-term. It's most obvious when we think about climate change and the threats that we see from climate change, that we see the effects already today. And that's just not our grandchildren. We often talk about the grandchildren, but this is today. It's us. It's our kids right now that's experience the effects from global warming, and also even more so in other countries, which is also a side of it that I think is important to have in mind. But at the same time, and I think this is quite important, it's also necessary to have policy that makes the world a better place right now for the people here right now. And that's because we need always to bear in mind that we obviously need to reduce the amount of suffering, and we need to make sure the society works and functions better right now, in order also to preserve democracy. And democracy is a key, I think, in order to also meet the challenges that you are talking about with the AI that's also happening right now. Unless we have a strong democracy and the people are supporting the democracy, I don't think we'll be able to face it in a good way.
Is there a contradiction, Will, between these two things, between fixing things right now and thinking long term?
Yeah, I mean, I largely think not at the moment, where, something that is surprising is the extent to which I have found that thinking about issues that you might think are far off sci-fi, so we got that a lot when we were worried about talking about pandemics in the 2010s, and then COVID-19 happens, it's like, okay, that wasn't such a far off concern. Or worrying about AI, and then ChatGPT makes people appreciate, okay, this is not such a far off concern either. And so, I'm talking about intelligence explosion, the point of time where we get human-level AI. It's hard to know, of course, but many people's best guess is that that's happening, towards the end of this decade or 2030. And really, that's affecting almost everyone alive in the present at the moment. It might feel futuristic. It feels like a sci-fi thing, but actually that's just the nature of exponential, let alone super exponential technological progress, is that things that might feel very far off, like moonshine or sci-fi, actually happens very quickly. So this is an area where I think navigating this is just really very good for the present generation, as well as being of great benefit for future generations.
Adele Matteson-Mestad, you're the director of the National Institution for Human Rights, and if I understand correctly, Parliament sort of made you guys so that you can make sure that we will follow the human rights. When Will was talking about a global constitution, I was thinking about how I should frame my question to you, since you're a lawyer and you know about law. But I guess in my as I've understood law, it's always about current affairs and what people do right now. It's not so much futuristic law. I don't know if that's a discipline in universities. But what are you thinking about his suggestion, basically?
So there are three things, really. I mean, first of all, when we talk about law is slow, usually. It takes time to regulate things. And that's a huge problem when it comes to AI, because our regular way of making rules just keeps lagging behind. That's a huge problem. We had, for instance, I was in a freedom of speech commission. So the parliament says, or the government says, we want to have a freedom of speech commission, right? And we were sitting there thinking for 2 years together. And we presented our huge written report. And the second we presented it, so many things had changed in technology that we weren't even aware of. So the problem with exponential growth or speed is that our systems, our institutional systems, are not apt for regulating in that speed, which is one huge problem.
Yeah.
The second huge problem.
What is most slow, law or politics? Would you think?
I mean, law is politics, so that's why it's slow. Isn't that true?
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah.
And the second problem is that one main thing about law is that you regulate within a legal system, a national state. And these are transboundary problems. Climate change is, and new technology is. It's not bound to states. So you have to do it through international legal systems. You have to solve it through either the EU, which is very in front of this. I mean, they really try to regulate, and there's a lot of sort of good regulatory processes going on within the EU. But if you look at it at a global scale, you have to go to the UN, and the UN General Secretary is very concerned with this, and they try to sort of invent new ways of regulating AI. But again, then that's twice as slow, because it's within an international legal system. And that leads to a further lag behind of the technology. And the third problem is what you're talking about mostly, is that can we regulate for future generations? Most of the law that we have applies to people that are living today. We do have some rules that applies to future people or future generations, particularly when it comes to climate change, actually, which is quite interesting because some would say that it's an environmental principle that you have to think about the future generations. It's even within our own constitutional protection of the right to a healthy environment that applies to future generations too. That's the same in Germany, and in the sort of core or in the center when we talk about human rights and climate change is the question of intergenerational equity. How will the rules, how the decisions that we make today apply to people in the future? And that's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful legal thought, but I think it only applies to climate change. We haven't really given that a lot of thought when it comes to new technology, and I think that's a really interesting analogy that you can make, and we probably should be doing more.
Kari, and then Will.
I agree that politics can be slow. It should also be slow.
It should be slow.
It's important because both, obviously, you need to make the right decisions, but also you need to have the people with you. Because if we just go on and making decisions that the people don't follow and the people don't understand or necessarily agree with, that's also wrong. But politics can also be swift. And we've seen so many examples when disasters or other big global events even is happening, politics can work quite quickly. And I think that's just important to bear in mind right here, that when we're talking about AI, we're basically talking about data. It's the data that we need to regulate. It's the data we can control much more than we do today, and we should do so internationally, globally, and take these few global efforts that's been so far and support them from Norway, obviously, but also push them forward, thinking about new ways of regulating the data. Who's going to own the data in the future, and how are we going to make sure that the people have get the value from all the data, that it's not just some few big companies or people that's making the profit. Right now in Norway, we've been talking a lot about resource rent, grunnrenteskatt, on various natural resources. Let's talk about that in terms of data, for example.
So you think that will save our future, Will, if we can have grunnrenteskatt on data?
On data, yeah, I think, so there are obviously a bunch of important issues about, and really quite difficult issues about who gets paid what if data gets used to train AI models. I think that control of data is just not really going to be a way of us getting a handle on these more powerful developments in AI. Because already what's really happening is synthetic data. So essentially the AI systems will create the data that they can use to train themselves. So if I'm trying to train a model that gets very good at programming, well, one model can say, here's 10 programming puzzles, and then another model tries to solve them, and then you can have the first model then grade the second model. And that's all just created, it's synthetic, rather than kind of taking data just from the internet. And that, I think, is already becoming really quite a big part of training these models. I think it's going to be a bigger and bigger part. In the same way that, I'm learning a lot in the course of this conversation by having, back and forth between us. That's the way that these models are going to get even more powerful. And so I think the thing that we really need to control is the computing power. These supercomputers that are being used to train the models, it's actually just a handful of companies that are used to build them. And that is something we can track. It's something that governments can pay attention to. It's where regulation is really able to bite and be enforceable.
I would like to dig a bit more into, both law and politics here, but I would also like to ask you, Torgeir Kolshus. You're the director of the Institute of Anthropology at the University of Oslo. We're talking about thinking not fast and slow, but I guess long and short here, and that's something I know many people in your field study a lot. What's your perspectives on our discussion so far, and it's
I'd like to pick up on Kari Elisabeth's input, whether politics can be slow, but it can also be fast, and it can also speed things up. And this is why I find your perspectives really interesting and provocatively so, because your take on it's not defeatism. You haven't left liberal democracies behind, and you go for this. When you talk about this convention, I had two images in my head at the same time. One was, the international intergovernmental panel on climate change, and the COP, the one providing the feeding in to the other with the proper science at the time, best knowledge at the time, and then they make political decisions. And the other was the Senate in the prequel of Star Wars, like where everything just go haywire, and you realize that we want that one man to lead us into the future, and we abandon everything else of our rights and input. And this is where I think these. When we look at the future and imagine future, but I love looking at old sci-fi movies. I love T2, for instance, but my favorite is 2001: A Space Odyssey. They serve as some sort of archaeology of the imagination to me. And in 2001. Seen from 1968, in 2001, we had a colony on the moon. We had an expedition going to Jupiter, and people were eating these pills, and everybody wore sensible clothes, no colors, and the only thing that has come true that they couldn't envisage at the time was that the leaders could not be anything but men, and those who served the coffee could not be anything but women. And that speaks volumes to the power of politics. And most of those that massive change, in social systems, has been driven by political initiatives in correspondence and mutually reinforced by people realizing that political change can affect my life and make it better, which feeds back into the drive for further political change. So that kind of liberation has set you and me in particular, Will, free. As well, I'm older than middle-aged, but you are very much younger than middle-aged, so we're kind of the merger of us, the two of us, will be the freest individual on the planet. And that gives us a responsibility, as you very accurately point out, the responsibility and the moral responsibility to act on behalf of the future. My concern is we are terribly poor at envisioning this future. So what I see in your work, and I've read your book with lots and lots of great benefit to me and to my thinking. What my concern is whether sometimes you provide a scaffolding for that process, which is very positive. In other cases, I see some suggestions that I find to be temporarily myopic in some ways. It's based on our concerns now, but we can't really envisage those future concerns. So how do we feed that back into to the system, which I know you also have many answers to, interesting answers, and I'll let you pick up many points on this one. Yeah.
That's great. So you're sort of concerned that William MacAskill is like Stanley Kubrick in 1968.
Yes, no, well, it's and that would be a compliment. I mean,
that's a compliment.
It's incredibly powerful, but it's still so 1968.
Yeah. Well, yeah. There's this general worry where when you're trying to think about the future and a good future, like you say, you just impart your own biases into that. So Thomas More's Utopia, he's describing. It's not quite clear if it's satire, if it's meant to be an accurate description. But he's talking about this amazing society and like everyone's so rich, and obviously everyone has 2 slaves. It's just wonderful, and it's just the clearest example of why they didn't even think that might be a morally controversial aspect of a good future. And I think that's 100% something we should be extremely concerned about now. And probably you're right that I am failing to completely let go of whatever the existing misconceptions of our time are. And so that's why I think as much as possible, we want to essentially leave the future open for future generations. Keep as many options open as we can, such that future generations can figure out what they want, figure out what's best for them, make moral progress so that they look back on us in the 21st century in just the same way as we look back on, the Romans crucifying people or keeping slaves or being incredibly misogynistic and patriarchal as, morally atrocious behavior. That's the kind of good outcome. And that, as much as possible, involves ensuring that we can still have a society at all. We haven't just completely blown everything up. Ensuring that there's still a society with, a more equal distribution of power that is free, is capable of free thought, hasn't been entirely co-opted by one set of interests. And so, that's, in general, I'm really not trying to aim us towards some particular vision of a good future, but instead, this more methodological thing of ensuring we have our options open and ensuring that we can keep moral progress going for as long as we can.
So, are you satisfied with that answer?
I'm very satisfied, yes. Surprisingly so, I must say, because
But how do you avoid it? I mean, how do you avoid? I mean, we can be concerned about it, but how can we avoid, just imposing our 2023 idea of the future? You have an idea?
No, I have another point, but
okay,
keep that open first. Yeah.
Well, I think there are some things that are clearly where clearly kind of if you take one sort of action, you can't go back. So. In the most extreme case, if there's a catastrophe that kills everybody, we can't come back from that.
No.
We have closed off the options of future generations. In fact, they don't exist at all. Another, though, concerns different forms of government. So you mentioned democracy. One of the things that's amazing about democracy is that it can change over time. Contrast that with an authoritarian state, a fascist or totalitarian one. It is locked in. It has a particular ideology, and it's about enforcing that ideology over time. So if we let the world enter into that sort of state, well, then we've closed off options for future generation, because that is not a system that is able to evolve over time. Whereas a democratic, liberal society with free speech, and ideally even, in fact, a championing of new moral ideas, is able to evolve over time.
But I would like to ask Kari Elisabeth a question, because I don't see this explicitly in your book, but it can be read as an assumption that current policies have failed in some ways, and politicians don't really have that long-term perspective. I agree with your distinction between long-term and long-termism, long-term thinking and long-termism, which I'm sure you also would, obviously. But what made you go into politics in the first place? I could imagine that was one of those concerns that we're talking about here, not necessarily 1,000 generations from now, but at least improving society beyond your own time span.
It was, and I think you get a different answer from different politicians. For me, Personally, it was due to climate change, basically. And quite honestly, if we've listened to the young people and the environmental movement, but also the UN for 30 years ago, we would have been in a different place today, a different situation, both in Norway but also internationally, because we've known about this threat for quite some time right now. And you also see the consequence of not thinking long term is that we need to act, as we talked about, quite faster, with all the consequences that has, because that have a lot of negative effects, drastically reducing the climate gas emissions in so short term that we're talking about today.
But that doesn't give a lot of hope for Will's idea that we should face AI effectively when you look at how we face climate change, does it?
Well, I think we have different examples. The global pandemic, the COVID pandemic, shows that we are able to react quite fast, and also that we are able to work together across nations. When it comes to climate change, I think we see that there's also another aspects of this that we need to take into consideration, also discussing AI and the future, and that is that there are different interests. You see all these various conflicts of interests and also different groups that have different sorts of power in a way. You have the fossil fuel industry that's been advocating against cutting climate gas emissions and against renewable energy for 30 years now. And that's a power. You need to sort of bear in mind that there are there are different types of interests, and unless you're also interested in do something about that today, you're not going to be able to shape the future. But I also just would like to make another point, because coming from the political left, which I do, I also think it's just important to remember that the history has seen so many examples of various ideologies, especially on the left, like communism, that sort of painted this prospect of this bright future and made that an ideal that's also been legitimizing a lot of atrocities at the present time. And it's not a coincidence that the Star Wars sort of shows the German Nazi regime. We've seen all these examples, and I think that we should think long term, but we need to think also of the present and the people today and the democracy today.
Is there a danger, Will, that we, in thinking about people, a glorious future, like the sun from Munch, and we forget about the people here and now, and make bad political choices?
Yeah, I mean. There's one worry which ties into this, imparting our own misconceptions. There's definitely a worry of this sort of utopian thinking, capital U, where you have some very particular vision of the future, and you just think, well, ends justify the means. And we saw that in the 20th century in the most horrific ways with Stalinism, Maoism, fascism. And, history tells us anything, it's to be very scared of that. That's quite different, I think, from appreciating the scale of the future and appreciating how much is at stake and saying, precisely because it's so big and important, and some people mightn't just try and claim it, we want to try and have an open sea for to give an opportunity for future generations to make further moral progress. And then secondly is the question of whether there are intense trade-offs between thinking long-term and thinking short-term for the present. And when I started on this, I really thought there were going to be. I thought this was like the moral campaign that I would be engaging in, is saying, look, this is going to be hard for the present, but future generations matter. We need to make some sacrifices. But it turns out that actually many of these issues are so important and yet so neglected that even just from the perspective of the present generation, we're not doing nearly enough. Where, a sane world would have been radically more prepared for COVID-19. A sane world would be putting tens of billions of dollars per year into preventing and mitigating the next pandemic, even if we didn't care about future generations at all. Similarly with AI, this sort of stuff is coming in the next years, in the next decade. Even if you just care about yourself and your children and no one else at all, it really means, we as a society should be really spending far more effort than we are to just get a handle on these risks and be prepared ahead of time.
So you think there's, and this is for everybody, is there a bigger chance that we can respond to AI more similar to the way we responded to COVID-19 when it actually happened? Or is it more realistic that we'll respond to it the same way as we've been responding to climate change?
I mean, I think we can do better than both.
But you think that's realistic, or you think it's just a possibility?
I actually think, we're seeing the seeds of it happening. This is my optimism coming out again.
Yeah.
I think we're seeing the seeds of it happening so Bill McKibben, a leading environmentalist, has this great quote about how in the 70s, even just small changes, like even just a low carbon tax, $1 on a ton of CO2, could have just completely changed the trajectory of the development of fossil fuels. We could have, I honestly believe we could have fusion by now if we'd put in enough resources. We could have had very cheap solar tech that we now have. We could have had that, decades earlier if we'd put in the investment. But what we did have instead was Exxon deliberately promoting misinformation. It went in exactly the opposite direction. Where are we now? Very early on with respect to AI, very tentative. But honestly, the leaders of the labs are concerned about the risks and are pushing in that direction. Political leadership is taking it seriously. I don't want to say get super optimistic, but at least there's the seeds of thinking, look, we actually could be pushing this in a positive direction, better than either we manage for pandemic preparedness or for climate change. And it's just a matter of ensuring we keep going in that direction.
Big data are more are nicer than big tobacco and big oil were, as far as I understand you. Adela?
I just wanted to build on what you were saying, because I love that about your book, the positive perspective, because I think that we all kind of crave that these days. And reminding us of the choices that we didn't make, that we could have made, that would have made things different. And that's, I think, what we can learn from. And that's a precautionary tale, really, in the field of climate change and environmental law. The precautionary principle is really important. And if you had actually built on that with your example, if you had used that and said, well, we have enough knowledge now of the dangers of this, we should be precautionary here. And I think that applies for new technology as well. I mean, we know enough about the dangers to act on them. And I do think that we have the regulatory, quite good thinking on the regulatory frameworks. They cannot be too specific because we do not know what this technology will eventually be. But we know that some of it will be really risky and we should pause it. Some of it has a lower risk, but we should have really strong assessments on the implications of it. That's quite hard because some of it is in a black box. Our human minds don't even understand it, but we can make regulations like that. And some technology is very positive, and we should be and that sort of risk assessments in relations to climate, into new technology is what is evolving right now within the EU and within the UN system. And I think that requires quite a lot of us also from an institutional perspective, because it requires people from different backgrounds to talk to each other. The technology, the people with tech knowledge needs to talk to the lawyers and the politicians and the academics. So we need to sort of look at the institutional landscape as well in order to address these challenges. So, but I want to circle back to the sort of optimistic view that there are a lot of negative experiences that we can draw from, but there's also quite a lot of positive developments that we can also learn from, and that's the ones that we should apply.
I was wondering, Toga, this whole concept of thinking so far into the future, having these visions or ideas, is it a very specific? Is it like a Western thing to do that, or do you have? I mean, in your field of study, you study all cultures of the world, right? And I guess so. How do you place it in a social anthropology?
I'm the panoptic.
Yeah, you're the.
No, I study all cultures in the world through one very particular prism, which is the world on a small or tiny island in north of the island state of Vanuatu in the southwestern Pacific. Vanuatu is the most disaster-prone country on the planet. And the 1,000 people that live on this island that I work on, Malta, and been spending time 3 or 4 years, 3 years over the past 30 years, course of the past 30 years with, they know that for every 5th year there will be a cyclone that is so devastating that everything is ruined. I mean, there's a total etch-a-sketch, start over. And how do you plan for the future? How do you think of, as we do, as what Anthony Giddens said characterized the late modern age? We think constantly about where am I, and with reference to my life project, which is chosen among a million possible life projects. This is my cause. Where am I on with relation to that cause? That's the part of the chronic self-reflexivity that we're talking about. To them, the future is, the only certainty about the future is that it will be uncertain, that there will be new starts over and over again. How does that affect ideas of hope, for instance? And one of the things I find really commendable with your work, Will, is the fact that there's always a fragment of hope, even the most dystopian outlooks, I must say. And hope now, to give people hope, is a vocation. It's a vocation for us as academics, for politicians, and everybody else. Hope is the sense that what is desirable can also be possible. And to have this, this tinge of realism, while allowing ourselves to think loud and big and long and short term, is a quality in all kinds of thinking, I say. When I read your book, I thought, okay, anthropology is philosophy with people in. And I said, okay, you're putting us out of work. But there's something that I think might be missing, and that's human nature. I mean, because the positive outlook on us, our basic constituent that we do, once we are enlightened, we will follow the principles. We will see reason when it's laid before us. And then, operationalize it, put it into action, political action, and that the desirable change will happen. That is part of the things that I question, because I've seen so many examples to the opposite, and I know we all have.
Okay.
I think the point about hope is extremely important, and it's important for all of us, like you say. And although I appreciate what you're saying, that the development of AI, it might be next year, it might be in 100 years. We don't really know what we're talking about here. It's in the long term, but it's also happening right now. I think that for people, when we need hope for ourselves and our children. We tuck in our kids at night. We think about their future. It's difficult, I think, to sort of then say to these people that no, but it's more important to think about the next generations to come. We're most close to what's close to us in a way, and so that's why I think it's just important, especially for politicians, to just bear that in mind, that when we are talking about hope, when we're creating hope in our politics, it's for the people today and their kids and their society in a way, because that's what's making the world function. Unless we're going to have upheaval, basically.
Do you guys agree with? Well, as I understand it, you find that somebody living 200,000 years from now, they have the same legitimate rights as the people in this room, I guess. Do you guys agree with that?
It's a refreshing perspective, but I don't fear proximity in the way that you do. Emotional proximity, temporal proximity, it can also trigger action. Because then if you've experienced the kind of closeness that you have with the people that are closest to you, that also enables you to empathize with people who are farther away. So I don't see emotion or connectedness or the myopia, for that matter, as a challenge to our way to our potential for acting, doing good in the world.
I'll ask Will quick, and then I'll ask the lawyer what's the correct answer.
So you're right that I think someone in 200,000 years has just the same moral rights as someone alive today. I think that's distinct from what will take what will cause us to take action or not. It's certainly a hard sell to say, look, care about these people you'll never meet. But, just think about how, people in the past with respect to us, should they have thought that we just don't matter at all? Well, especially if they could have affected us. I think not. And I think that when we think about, ways we could potentially negatively impact those in the future, if we leave nuclear waste in the ground and it poisons someone in 1,000 years' time, just seems that's as bad as poisoning someone in 10 years' time, if you know it's going to happen. And yeah, sure, that's maybe is a harder sell than getting people riled up about a problem that's so salient that you can film or something. But if it's true, then I think it's important to promote that message.
Yeah, and I guess now we're moving into law because that allows us also to think more abstract and of things in the future.
So I mean, you're talking about this from a moral perspective, and in the legal debates about this, they mostly relate to climate change, as I was saying, and we do have a explicit protection of the rights of future generations in our constitution. And when we think about that, that's a policy choice. It's a choice that the politicians made because they realized, I think, that the choices that we make today will have implications for thousands of years. In the words of IPCC, they claim that, and it's true because we lock in emissions, and they will have consequences. And the time is now to do something about that. If we do not act now, it will be too late. And I think that that's very concrete for people. People can get that, but I think the challenge here will be to sort of apply that approach, which is quite well debated in the legalistic fair. I mean, there's been written heaps about that, and it's part of a lot of different conventions. It's part of legal processes around the world at this point. But I think it's really interesting to think on how we can apply that to new technology as well, because there's a lot to learn. But by saying that, I'm not saying that we are actually doing it, because if we had, it would have been, like you said, we would have solved this many years ago, because we have been aware of the dangers of climate change for way too long and not acted on it. And now it's already urgent, and it's no longer a discussion about future generations. As you were saying, I mean, these children that are affected and will be more affected, they are already born. But the perspective, if I can just take 1 second, to say this, the perspective of human rights here is because, in history, we knew that democracy was insufficient to protect minorities, which would all otherwise be overrun in a democracy, which is why we need human rights to protect minorities, right? And we say that same approach can be applied to future generations because they do not have the right to vote in the democratic system now. And that also applies to children, and we have rules for that. We say because children are not represented in the democratic system, they have specific rights. You have a duty as a state to always consider the implications for them because they are not represented democratically. And that applies for future generations as well. So we have all these sort of lines of legal reasoning here that we can apply in this field, and that could be really interesting.
Well, that could start a whole new debate, but now we're getting close to the end. Actually, I think I would just like to ask you guys, what's your biggest takeaway from this, from Will's work and also from the discussion that we had now? What will you take with you from this and maybe apply in your thinking or work?
I would like to pick up one of the last points you made, and you also make that quite extensively in the book, is that if we knew that this would affect people 10 years from now and 100,000 years from now, what would be the principal choice to decide that this would, what responsibility is there might to act upon that knowledge, disregarding whether it's what time frame? And I try to play along with that, apart from the proximity argument, which is, I guess it's pragmatic, really. I couldn't come up with a proper answer to why. So that changed my ways of thinking. And so thank you very much. It doesn't happen often, I can assure you.
Kari Elisabeth.
So three things. First of all, the importance of regulating AI. So that's something that we need everyone to work on. Secondly, I think it's important, obviously, to think ahead, think about future generation. I completely agree on terms of, for example, nuclear waste. That's why we shouldn't rely on nuclear-fueled power plants, for example, because it's nuclear waste that we know is going to be most likely dangerous in the future. But what I want to sort of warn, or that I think we disagree about, is that I don't think we should today neither think that we are able to predict the future nor paint the picture of a perfect future. We don't know what's going to be the best future for the future generations. So we know that nuclear waste is a bad thing, but there's so many other things that we really are not capable of thinking or sort of shaping the future, and it's not. It's like you say, we don't know, and we shouldn't be sort of trying to predict nor morally frame the future. That's up for the future generations.
Denne.
I mean, I loved your book. I really did. It was so interesting, and I completely agree with you. But I think what I found to be most important is your claim that, or it sounds simple, but it's not so simple. We need to prioritize our efforts to the most pressing issues that are kind of irreversible at this point. I mean, we are in an exact time where action needs to be done in regards to these exact questions, because it's so important. It's so easy to be drawn into all sorts of issues, and then we sometimes seem to be forgetting the most important ones. And I think that all your work really goes to that, to sort of prioritize and use your energy where change can be made, and where it's really important that we fuel our energy. And that was really inspiring to me.
William, any takeaways from the conversation, and any advice for everybody who's there?
Okay, yeah, I mean, takeaways from the conversation is, maybe I should be a bit more optimistic in my talks as well as just in the Q&A afterwards. But yeah, and also just emphasizing the importance that, the aim is not to try and focus on some very particular vision of the future. The aim is just to stop society from stumbling into some sort of catastrophe it can't get out of, whether that's the collapse of civilization, or whether that's a totalitarian state or loss of control to AI systems themselves. And so that's, something I perhaps should emphasize more again. And then in terms of advice to people in the audience, I mean, the main thing I want to say is just that, everyone in this room has a tremendous ability to do good in the world. Norway is one of the richest countries on earth. If you're in this room, you're probably either now or in the near future going to be among the richest 1% of the world's population. That alone gives you enormous power to make a difference, whether that's to the global poor or whether it's to tackle some of these issues. It's very rare for there to be a non-profit organization that won't benefit and be able to do more good with additional funding. And so charitable donations can make an absolutely huge difference. But even beyond that, we just need more people who are morally motivated to be working on these issues, whether that's governance around AI or biotechnology or climate change. And you can get more information about all of these things at Giving What We Can on the donation side, 80,000 hours on the career choice side. But yeah, each and every one of you have a huge ability to make a difference. And so I hope you take that opportunity.
So, Torgeir Kåshus, Kari Elisabeth Kaski, Adele Mattisson-Mestad, and of course, William MacAskill, thank you very much for the conversation. Let's give them a big round of applause.
Noen har snakket sammen i samarbeid med Dagsavisen.
Det stemmer. En av de sakene jeg har satt pris på å lese i Dagsavisen siden sist, en reportasje fra Jaffa i Israel, der det handler om hvordan folk der lever i en relativt harmonisk sameksistens på tvers av etnisitet. Det gir jo håp i en tid hvor vi ser TV-bildene fra Israel sine angrep på Gaza, og det lett å bli matt av alle de grusomhetene som skjer der.
Dagsavisen der, altså.